You're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's December 4th, 1872. The wind is cold, the sky is gray, and the only sound that exists is the crashing of waves against your ship's hull. Suddenly, one of your sailors points toward the horizon and shouts, "There's a ship adrift. It sways from side to side in a strange way, with no direction, as if it's lost." You approach slowly. The name on the hull reads, Mary Celeste. You call out, no one answers. You call again. Absolute silence. Then you climb aboard, and what you find will haunt you for the rest of your life. The table is set for dinner. The food is still there. The crew's clothes are folded in their quarters. Personal belongings, jewelry, money, everything in its place. There are enough provisions for months. The ship is in perfect condition, undamaged, no fire, no sign of attack. But there isn't a single living soul on board. 10 people. Vanished. As if the ocean had simply opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. Welcome, explorer. Today we're diving together into the depths of the greatest mysteries the ocean has ever kept. 6 ocean mysteries they don't want you to know about. Ships that vanished without a trace. Entire cities swallowed by the sea and forgotten by history. Creatures and sounds rising from depths where nothing should exist. And behind all of it, one single certainty. Some questions were meant to never be answered. But not today, because I'm Curious Chris, and together we're going to unravel these mysteries. Ahoy! Mary Celeste, the ship no one should have found. The Mary Celeste had departed from New York, bound for Genoa, Italy, carrying a cargo of denatured alcohol. On board were Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, his 2-year-old daughter, and 7 crew members. Real people, with names, with families waiting for them on the other side of the ocean. The ship that found them, the Dei Gratia, was on the same route, and its captain knew Captain Briggs personally. When the Dei Gratia's crew boarded, what they found defied all logic. The lifeboat had been removed from the ship, indicating a deliberate evacuation, but the weather records showed calm seas in the preceding days. The sails were partially set, as if someone had left in a hurry but without panic. One of the water pumps had been disassembled, as if someone had been performing routine maintenance when they suddenly decided to abandon everything. Experienced sailors don't abandon a ship that's still afloat. Not without a reason that is literally a matter of life or death. The Mary Celeste was not sinking. It was not on fire. It was not under attack. So why did they leave? The official inquiry was conducted by the Vice Admiralty Court in Gibraltar. Investigators examined every detail of the ship for weeks. They found that 9 barrels of alcohol had been opened, but the contents were accounted for. The ship's clock had stopped. The compass was damaged. But nothing, absolutely nothing, explained the disappearance of the 10 people. Theories emerged immediately. Piracy was ruled out because the cargo and valuables were intact. Mutiny was considered unlikely because the crew was known for their loyalty to the captain. Natural disaster was eliminated because the ship had suffered no significant damage. The most widely accepted theory to this day suggests that alcohol fumes created a risk of explosion, leading the captain to order a temporary evacuation. But here's the problem with that theory. If they evacuated out of fear of an explosion that never happened, why did they never return? The ship was still floating. The danger had passed. Where did they go? In 1873, the tribunal closed the inquiry with a conclusion that will leave you speechless. The Mary Celeste had been abandoned, but the reason remained undetermined. Undetermined. 10 people disappeared in the middle of the Atlantic. And the official answer was a shrug. The ship was recovered, sold, and continued sailing for a few more years before being deliberately run aground in 1885 as part of an insurance fraud scheme. Modern researchers continued trying to answer what the tribunal couldn't. Some propose that a submarine earthquake created violent waves that frightened the crew. Others suggest that Captain Briggs made a navigational error and believed he was closer to shore than he was, risking an unnecessary evacuation. But none of these theories explain why the ship's log ends abruptly 9 days before the vessel was found. None of them explain why no trace of the lifeboat was ever found on one of the busiest shipping routes of the 19th century. And this is where the story stops being merely curious and starts being truly disturbing. No body from the Mary Celeste was ever found. No piece of the lifeboat ever washed up on any shore in the world. In more than 150 years of investigation, research, and speculation, no definitive evidence explaining the fate of the 10 people aboard has ever come to light. If they evacuated due to immediate danger, why did they never signal for rescue? If they believed rescue was nearby, why is there no record of their arrival anywhere? And if the abandonment of the Mary Celeste was as straightforward as the official reports claim, why does it remain the most analyzed and most debated maritime mystery in history? The ocean has kept that secret for 150 years. And while the Mary Celeste carried a mystery that began with an inexplicable abandonment, the next ship on this list carries something even more disturbing. Because someone on board deliberately cut the radio before disappearing. MV Joyita. Someone on board didn't want to be found. You're on the deck of a merchant ship in the middle of the South Pacific. It's 1955. The sun is strong, the sea is calm, and the trip was supposed to last only 2 days. There are 25 people on board, passengers and crew, including a doctor, a government official, and entire families traveling between Pacific islands. It's a common, safe route, made hundreds of times before. No one is worried. No one has any reason to be. Then the ship disappears. No storm, no distress call. Absolutely nothing. 5 weeks later, the MV Joyita is found adrift more than 1,000 kilometers from where it should be, partially submerged, covered in mud, leaning dangerously to one side. And when investigators board it, what they find doesn't look like an accident. It looks like a crime scene. The deck is covered in blood. Bloody bandages are scattered across the floor. A doctor's bag lies open in the middle of the corridor, and the 25 people who should be there simply aren't. No bodies, no lifeboats, no explanation. The Joyita was a robust vessel, built with cork-lined walls, designed to be virtually unsinkable. Even damaged, even tilting, even partially submerged, the ship kept floating. That's important, because it means the 25 people on board didn't flee because the ship was sinking. They fled for another reason. When investigators carefully examined the ship, they found something that completely changed the nature of the case. The Joyita's radio had been tuned to the international distress frequency, the frequency every ship in the world monitored 24 hours a day. But no signal had been sent. Why? Because the radio cables had been cut, not ripped out by force, not corroded by time, cut cleanly, deliberately, with a sharp tool. Someone aboard the Joyita, before the disappearance, had intentionally prevented any distress signal from being sent. Someone didn't want to be found. Investigators continued searching the ship for answers. The logbook had vanished. The navigation charts were gone. The firearms that should have been on board were no longer there. But the passengers' personal belongings, including money and valuables, were intact in the cabins. The lifeboats had been launched, but incorrectly, suggesting extreme haste or total panic. The cargo was largely intact, with no signs of looting, and the blood on the deck indicated serious injuries, but investigators couldn't determine whose blood it was, what had caused the wounds, or exactly when everything had happened. The official inquiry concluded that the Joyita had collided with a submerged object, causing damage to the hull. Unable to repair the damage, and with the radio inoperable, the crew would have abandoned the ship and perished at sea. But that conclusion completely ignored the most important question of all. Who cut the radio cables, and why? Alternative theories multiplied in the years that followed. Piracy was considered, but the fact that nothing of value had been stolen made that explanation unlikely. Mutiny was raised, but the ship's officers were experienced and well-respected. The most disturbing theory emerged in 1963, when a former naval officer claimed that wreckage from a lifeboat matching the Joyita had been found near the Marshall Islands, more than 2,000 miles from where the ship had been discovered. According to this officer, the wreckage was examined by military authorities and then destroyed. No official record of that analysis exists to this day. Declassified military documents from that period reveal that the South Pacific was being used for secret naval exercises and weapons testing during the time of the Joyita's disappearance. Whether any of those operations crossed the ship's path was never officially investigated. Requests for access to detailed naval records from that period were denied. None of the 25 missing people were ever found. No survivor ever came forward. The ship was eventually scrapped for parts, taking with it any physical evidence that might still have existed. In 70 years of investigation, the only certainty we have is that someone aboard the Joyita deliberately cut the radio before everything happened. That detail was never explained, never resolved, and never stopped being disturbing. If the crew abandoned the ship due to an accident, why is there no trace of the lifeboats? If outside forces were involved, why was the case never investigated beyond the initial inquiry? And if the Joyita was simply another tragic maritime accident, why did someone go to the trouble of making sure no distress call could ever be sent? The Mary Celeste disappeared without a trace. The Joyita disappeared with clear signs that something went very wrong on board. But the next mystery on this list is different from both, because this time we're not talking about a merchant vessel, but an American warship with 309 people on board, which simply vanished off the map without leaving absolutely anything behind. USS Cyclops, the Navy that lost a warship and pretended not to know why. You're in the port of Barbados. It's March 4th, 1918. The sun is rising over the Atlantic, and before you stands one of the largest ships in the American Navy, the USS Cyclops. It's more than 500 feet long. It weighs nearly 20,000 tons. It carries 309 people on board: sailors, officers, and military passengers. It's a warship, inspected, reviewed, deemed in perfect sailing condition by experienced naval engineers. The weather is good. There's no storm on the horizon. There are no reports of enemy activity in the area. The captain gives the order to depart. The Cyclops leaves Barbados bound for Baltimore in the United States. And then something happens. Something that to this day no one has been able to explain. The ship disappears, without a single distress signal, without a fragment of debris, without an oil slick on the ocean's surface. 309 people vanish, as if the ocean had simply opened its mouth and swallowed everything: the ship, the crew, and any evidence that they had ever existed. The captain of the Cyclops was Lieutenant Commander George Worley, a German-born naturalized American with a reputation for eccentric behavior that made his own officers uncomfortable. In the days before departing Barbados, Worley did something that caught the attention of port authorities. He altered the ship's planned route without giving any explanation. When his officers asked for clarification, he responded only that he had orders. Those orders were never found in the naval records. Never. The U.S. Navy conducted a massive search after the disappearance, sending ships and aircraft to sweep thousands of square miles of ocean. They found nothing. No debris, no lifeboats, no bodies, no fuel slick. The official report issued in 1918 concluded that the Cyclops had likely sunk due to structural failure or sudden catastrophic damage. But the report presented no evidence to support that conclusion. It was speculation presented as an answer, filed away and forgotten. The theories that emerged in the years that followed covered the full spectrum from plausible to extraordinary. Some researchers suggested the ship was overloaded, causing a sudden capsize. Others proposed that a German submarine had sunk the Cyclops. But no German submarine commander ever claimed that attack, and post-war records show no engagement of that nature. The most technically sound theory points to the cargo of manganese ore the ship was carrying. If that cargo had shifted during the crossing, it could have unbalanced the ship within minutes, causing it to roll and sink so rapidly that no one would have had time to send a distress signal. But ships carrying similar loads had faced rough seas without incident. In 1968, 50 years after the disappearance, the Navy briefly reopened the case. They reviewed all available records and found inconsistencies in the timeline, gaps in communication logs, and unexplained deviations in the ship's last known route. The review was classified as confidential. No conclusions were ever made public. Here is where the story gets even more disturbing. The USS Cyclops was not the only ship of its kind to disappear. Two sister ships of the Cyclops, the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus, also vanished without a trace in the same region of the Atlantic during World War II. All three ships were carrying similar cargo. All three were following similar routes. All three disappeared under nearly identical circumstances. The U.S. Navy never provided an explanation for the loss of all three ships. It never treated the three disappearances as part of a pattern. Each case was filed as an isolated incident. Documents declassified during the Cold War era revealed that the region where the Cyclops disappeared, an area that would later become known as the Bermuda Triangle, had been the site of experimental naval weapons testing. Whether those tests were happening in 1918 remains unknown. Requests for access to pre-World War I naval testing records have been systematically denied. And this is where you need to stop and think. Three identical ships, same region, same circumstances, same outcome, total disappearance, no traces, no survivors, no convincing official explanation. If the Cyclops sank due to structural failure, why has no wreckage ever been found in one of the most heavily patrolled stretches of the Atlantic? If no external factor was involved, why was the 1968 case review immediately classified as confidential? And if three identical ships disappeared in the same region under nearly identical circumstances, why does each disappearance continue to be treated as an isolated event rather than part of a larger pattern that has never been resolved? So far, the mysteries we've explored happened on the ocean's surface. But the next case on this list takes us down, far down below the surface, to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, where an entire city vanished from history and was found 2,000 years later, exactly as it was abandoned, as if time had simply stopped. Heraklion, the city history forgot and the sea kept. Imagine you're diving in the Mediterranean Sea, a few miles off the coast of Egypt. The water is murky, Visibility is low, and below you, there's only darkness. You descend 30 feet, 60 feet, and then, at the very edge of what your lights can illuminate, you see something that freezes every muscle in your body. A stone hand, enormous, rising from the seafloor. You approach slowly and begin to make out more. A face, an entire statue, lying on the bottom, more than 15 feet tall. Around it, broken columns, stone blocks covered in algae. And then, as your eyes adjust to the darkness, you begin to see the full extent of what's before you. Streets, stone-paved walkways, building foundations, temples, docks. An entire city, perfectly preserved, asleep on the bottom of the Mediterranean for more than 2,000 years. You've just found Heraklion, the city historians debated for centuries whether it was real or merely a myth. And it is far more than anyone had imagined. In 2000, French marine archaeologist Frank Godiot dove into the waters off Alexandria, Egypt, searching for the wreckage of ancient ships. What he found completely changed our understanding of the ancient world. Heraklion, also known by its Egyptian name Thonis, had been one of the greatest ports of ancient Egypt. Herodotus and other classical historians had mentioned it in their texts, but for centuries scholars debated whether the city had actually existed or was merely legend. Godiot's team found the answer on the seafloor at a depth of approximately 30 feet. Granite statues more than 15 feet tall, temple columns, gold coins, the remains of 64 sunken ships, and inscriptions that confirmed beyond any doubt. That was Heraklion. The city covered an area of several square miles. The structures were remarkably intact. The streets were identifiable, and the artifacts were scattered across the seafloor as if the city had sunk suddenly, without warning, without giving anyone time to save absolutely anything. Carbon dating and analysis of the pottery found indicated that Heraklion was at its peak between the 8th and 4th centuries BCE. It was a vital trade hub, connecting Egypt to the Greek and Mediterranean worlds. Ships from across the region anchored in its port. Merchants, priests, and diplomats walked its streets. And then, at some point around the 2nd century BCE, the city simply vanished from the historical record. No mention of conquest, no account of destruction, no record of evacuation. The city disappeared from history as if someone had torn out the pages that spoke of it. Geological surveys suggested that Heraklion sank due to a combination of soil liquefaction, rising sea levels, and possibly a major earthquake. The Nile Delta, where the city was located, is geologically unstable. Over time, the ground gave way, and the city slid to the bottom of the sea. But the abrupt nature of the sinking raises questions that explanation cannot answer. If the process was gradual, why didn't the inhabitants evacuate? Why were valuables left behind? And why do the historical records contain no mention of a disaster large enough to swallow an entire city? Godiot's team discovered that many buildings showed signs of extremely rapid collapse. Walls had fallen inward. Ceilings had caved in. Heavy objects remained exactly where they were when the city sank, as if everything had been pulled straight down in a matter of minutes. One temple contained statues still standing upright, untouched by the collapse around them. Another building held inscriptions detailing religious ceremonies, commercial records, and taxation documents, all cut off abruptly mid-sentence, as if the scribes had simply stopped writing and never returned. In 2006, the team discovered a massive stone slab covered in hieroglyphics, known as the Decree of Size, which confirmed Heraklion's religious and economic importance. The slab was intact and perfectly preserved. Egyptian authorities initially supported the excavation, But starting around 2010, access to the site began to be restricted. Diving permits were limited. Certain areas of the submerged city were declared off-limits, with authorities citing concerns about preservation and the risk of looting. Proposals to conduct advanced sonar mapping of the site's full extent were denied. Requests to excavate deeper layers, where older and potentially more revealing structures might be buried, were rejected. Independent researchers who attempted to study the site were prevented from accessing it. In 2015, satellite imagery revealed additional structures extending beyond the known boundaries of the city, suggesting that Heraklion was part of a far larger network of settlements than previously believed. The new discoveries generated excavation proposals. All were denied. Egyptian authorities cited concerns about damage to the site and the need to preserve the ruins for future study when better preservation technology becomes available. But the technology already exists. The methods are already proven. The only barrier is authorization. If Heraklion sank gradually, why is there no record of its population evacuating or resettling elsewhere? If the city's collapse is natural and well understood, why restrict the research? And if the site contains only what archaeologists have already documented, why is deeper excavation being systematically blocked? The city remains submerged. Most of its structures remain unexplored. And the full story of how one of ancient Egypt's greatest cities disappeared remains locked at the bottom of the Mediterranean, accessible only to those who receive permission from authorities who seem far more interested in controlling what gets discovered than in actually discovering it. But if you thought a submerged city hiding secrets was disturbing, the next topic on this list will take you somewhere much deeper and much darker, to the deepest point in the entire ocean, where something was seen at the bottom of the abyss, and whoever saw it never walked back what they claimed to have found down there. Challenger Deep. Exploring the deepest place in the oceans. You're inside a metal sphere the size of a small room. The walls around you are 6 inches of solid steel, and yet you can hear the hull groaning under the pressure. Outside, the temperature is near freezing. The darkness is absolute. Not a single particle of sunlight penetrates below 3,000 feet, and you passed that a long time ago. The depth gauge keeps dropping. 16,000 feet, 26,000 feet, 33,000 feet. You're descending into the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in the entire ocean, a place where the pressure is more than 1,100 times greater than at the surface, a place where, according to everything science knew up to that moment, complex life simply could not exist. It's January 23, 1960. You are Lieutenant Don Walsh of the U.S. Navy, or Swiss engineer Jacques Picard, and the two of you are about to become the first human beings to reach the absolute bottom of the ocean. The capsule lands softly on the floor. You look through the porthole, and you see something that will change everything you ever believed about the limits of life on Earth. The creature was there, at the bottom of Challenger Deep, nearly 36,000 feet below the surface. It was a flat fish, similar to what we know as a flounder, resting calmly on the sediment at the bottom as if that impossible place were simply its home. Walsh and Picard spent only 20 minutes at the bottom before being forced to ascend, but both saw the creature clearly enough to describe its details upon returning to the surface. Their account was met with immediate skepticism from the scientific community. Marine biologists questioned whether what they saw was really a fish, or perhaps a jellyfish, or some other soft-bodied organism misidentified in the darkness. The observation was dismissed as inconclusive. But think about what would be at stake if they were right. If complex life existed in Challenger Deep, then the biological assumptions about the limits of survival were completely wrong. And if those assumptions were wrong, what else could be alive in the 95% of the ocean that remains unexplored? No return mission to Challenger Deep was authorized for more than 50 years. The technology existed. The necessary equipment had already been developed. The funding and authorization simply never came. In 2012, filmmaker James Cameron piloted the submersible deep-sea Challenger to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, becoming the third person to reach it. His mission was extensively documented, equipped with high-definition cameras and advanced sample collection equipment. Cameron spent approximately 3 hours at the ocean floor, significantly longer than Walsh and Piccard had managed. He collected sediment samples, recorded detailed video, and observed the environment with unprecedented clarity. And what he found was surprising for a completely different reason. The bottom was empty, a muddy, desolate landscape with no complex organism visible. No fish, no large creatures, nothing resembling what Walsh and Piccard had described. Cameron declared that the bottom was far less inhabited than he had expected, comparing it to a desert. Marine biologists analyzed the samples he brought back and found only bacteria and simple organisms adapted to the extreme pressure. The 1960 sighting was officially reclassified as a likely misidentification. The scientific community moved on, but Don Walsh, who lived until 2023, never walked back what he claimed to have seen. Until the end of his life, he maintained that he had seen a fish and that the creature was real. In 2019, a Chinese submersible called Fenduja descended to Challenger Deep as part of a deep-water exploration program. The mission was conducted under strict security, with extremely limited information released to the international media. The crew reported observing unusual bioluminescent activity and detecting acoustic signals incompatible with any known marine species. Chinese authorities classified the mission's data, citing national research interests. No footage was released. No samples were shared with international institutions. The findings, whatever they are, remain inaccessible. Independent researchers who requested access to the data were denied. Western marine biologists who proposed joint expeditions to verify the findings were informed that the location was reserved for domestic research. No international collaboration is accepted. No data is shared. The deepest point on Earth had effectively become off-limits to independent investigation. In 2022, sonar mapping conducted by autonomous underwater drones detected large objects moving rapidly near the floor of the Mariana Trench. The objects, moving at speeds incompatible with any known marine life, were tracked for several minutes before descending beyond the sonar's range. The data was reviewed by naval researchers and immediately classified as confidential. No public statement was issued. And this is where you need to take a deep breath and consider what you've just heard. In more than 60 years since the first descent to Challenger Deep, no comprehensive biological survey has been conducted at the deepest place on Earth. The first man to reach it reported seeing complex life and was never disproved with concrete evidence. A Chinese mission detected unidentified acoustic signals and immediately classified the data. Drones detected objects moving at impossible speeds, and the data was made secret within hours. If Challenger Deep is a sterile, lifeless zone, why do multiple independent observations suggest otherwise? If Walsh and Piccard misidentified what they saw, why has no comprehensive survey been conducted in more than 60 years to definitively prove it? And if the deepest ocean holds secrets significant enough to warrant classification as a state secret, what exactly is being hidden? And who decided it should remain invisible? Challenger Deep showed us that even the most inaccessible place on Earth can hold secrets that someone prefers to keep buried. But the next mystery on this list takes us somewhere different. Not to the deepest point in the ocean, but to a hole in the middle of the South China Sea, where sounds that should not exist were recorded, classified, and never explained. Dragon Hole, the dragon's hole and the sounds no one should hear. You're on a research vessel in the South China Sea. The sun is setting on the horizon, and the water around you is so deep blue it looks like ink. Your boat's sonar equipment begins to ping. You look at the screen and see something that turns your stomach. On the seafloor, directly below you, there is a hole. Not a gentle depression in the ocean floor. A vertical hole with almost perfectly circular edges dropping straight down into a darkness that the sonar can barely measure. You send an underwater drone to investigate. It descends 30 feet, 60 feet, 150 feet, 300 feet. The water gets darker, colder, denser. At 600 feet of depth, oxygen levels begin to drop. At 1,000 feet, they're near zero. Anything that breathes oxygen would die at that depth. Then the drone detects movement. And then it detects something even more disturbing. Sounds. Rhythmic. Structured. Coming from below. Far below. From a depth where, according to everything science knows, nothing should be alive and nothing should be making noise. The Sancha Yongle Blue Hole, known locally as the Dragon Hole, is located approximately 15 miles off the coast of the Paracel Islands in the South China Sea. At nearly 1,000 feet deep, it is the deepest known blue hole on Earth, surpassing the famous Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas by more than double. Blue holes are vertical underwater caves formed when the limestone seafloor collapses, creating openings that can drop hundreds of feet straight down. They are relatively common in the Caribbean and the South Pacific, but the Dragon Hole is unlike any other ever documented. Its depth, its internal structure, and the conditions within it challenge everything we understand about these geological phenomena. In 2016, Chinese researchers conducted the first detailed analysis of the Dragon Hole using submersibles and remotely operated vehicles. They descended to depths where oxygen levels dropped to zero, where the water became acidic, and where no known form of life could survive. And they found life. Not simple bacteria. Complex organisms, crustaceans, mollusks, soft-bodied creatures that had never been documented by science. But it wasn't the creatures that most disturbed the research team. It was the sounds. Detected at more than 2,000 feet below the surface, the sounds were rhythmic and structured in a way that matched no known biological source. They were not whale songs. They were not tectonic activity. They were not equipment interference. The researchers systematically ruled out every conventional explanation and arrived at the same disturbing conclusion. The sounds were something they had never encountered before. Chinese authorities classified the findings immediately. The complete data from the 2016 expedition was never released. Requests from international marine biology institutions to review the samples or conduct independent research were denied without explanation. In 2018, satellite imagery detected unusual water displacement patterns near the opening of the Dragon Hole. The patterns suggested large-scale movement below the surface, as if something of significant size was entering or exiting the hole. The images were analyzed by independent researchers and then quietly removed from public satellite databases. No announcement, no explanation. They simply disappeared. Local fishermen have avoided the area for generations, not out of baseless superstition, but from experience accumulated over decades. Vessels that venture too close to the Dragon Hole report compasses spinning erratically, sonar systems failing without apparent cause, and engines cutting out completely in perfectly calm seas. These accounts, dismissed by authorities as popular exaggeration, have been consistently documented over decades, coming from different fishermen, at different times, describing the same experiences with nearly identical details. In 2020, a team of geologists proposed using deep-water drilling equipment to explore the lower chambers of the Dragon Hole, below the depths accessible to existing submersibles. The proposal was submitted to the Chinese government. It was rejected within weeks, with no explanation provided. Just no. International teams that requested authorization to conduct independent research at the site were informed that the Dragon Hole was a restricted area, accessible only to authorized Chinese research teams. No international collaboration is accepted. No data is shared. And here you need to consider the weight of all of this together. A geological formation that should be nothing more than a hole in the seafloor is surrounded by restrictions normally reserved for military installations. Organisms never before documented were found in its depths, and the data was immediately classified. Sounds of unknown origin were detected hundreds of feet below the surface, and no one has explained what produced them. Satellite images showing unusual activity were removed from public databases without warning. Local fishermen report consistent equipment failures in the vicinity and are systematically ignored. A proposal for deeper exploration was rejected within weeks and without justification. If the Dragon Hole is simply a natural geological formation, why classify research results? If the organisms found there are explainable within known biology, why prevent independent scientists from studying them? And if something more significant, something that would redefine our understanding of the ocean, and perhaps of life itself on Earth, resides in the depths of that hole, who benefits from keeping it hidden? And how much longer can they pull it off? 6 cases. 6 mysteries. 6 times the ocean has kept secrets that should have been answered, and weren't. The pattern is always the same. Research denied, data classified, evidence restricted, witnesses ignored, sites declared off-limits. The reason given is always preservation, security, or national interest. The outcome is always the same: silence. And the ocean, which already covers 71% of Earth's surface and remains 95% unexplored, keeps guarding its secrets with the help of those who should be revealing them. Now it's your turn. I want to know what you thought of all this. Which of these 6 mysteries disturbed you the most? Tell me in the comments below. And also, let me know whether you already knew any of these mysteries before watching this video. If you made it this far and haven't hit like yet, now's the time. Drop the like right now. It makes a real difference in helping more people find this channel. Subscribe if you haven't done it yet, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next explorations and mysteries. Thank you for being part of this. You're not just a viewer, you're an explorer. Every mystery we investigate is a step towards something most people will never go looking for. The ocean still has 95% left to explore, and we're going to keep diving into those depths together, one video at a time. I'm Curious Chris, and I'll see you on the next adventure. Until the next expedition.